The night cracked open with thunder as Jordan Hale stared at the unknown caller ID. Rain hammered the window, smearing the skyline into a bruised smear of light. The voice said the trust was empty, and the signature was his. He did not remember signing anything. He felt the room tilt, as if the storm had stepped indoors. Jordan said, "Repeat that," slowly. The caller read bank numbers like a priest, reading last rites. A warrant was pending, the voice warned. A second line lit up, Vivian Cross calling with a velvet ring. Jordan let it buzz. Lightning lit the desk and the neat stack of receipts he had saved for clean living. Jordan said, "This is a mistake." Silence answered, then a click. A vibration arrived from Marco Reyes. "You okay?" Jordan typed and deleted 3 replies. His breath fogged the glass as squad sirens echoed somewhere below. He opened the family folder, and a codicil stared back like a fresh bruise. Jordan said, "If this is family, what is an enemy?" Morning brought fluorescent cruelty to the lobby, as security badges blinked red. Jordan walked past, framed awards that suddenly felt borrowed. A manager cleared his throat and called it administrative leave. Cameras watched like bored crows. Vivian Cross arrived in tailored mercy and offered a ride. Jordan said, "I'll walk." Her smile did not touch her eyes. She murmured about mistakes and public relations, then folded his ID into her clutch. The elevator chimed and people pretended not to look. Jordan felt the world narrow to a corridor of breath and dust. He thought of the folder, of nights earned clean and honest. Vivian said, "I can make this vanish if you stop digging." Outside, the wind slapped his tie like a taunt. He stood there, suspended between pride and gravity, and chose refusal. At a corner pharmacy, Jordan tried a card, and then another as the cashier shifted from polite to pity. The terminal chirped decline like a metronome. He felt heat gather behind his ears, and forced a smile that did not hold. Outside, a black SUV idled with tinted certainty. Cole Mercer waited behind glass, a patient reef in a busy sea. Jordan said cash then. His wallet coughed up crumpled bills and dignity. The receipt printed a long accusing ribbon. He pocketed it as if it were evidence. The door chimed and cold air cut his lungs. He met his reflection in the window and saw a stranger rehearsing calm. The SUV's blinker ticked. He turned away before it turned toward him. Marco Reyes handed over a grease-streaked mug and asked nothing for a long time. The shop smelled of oil, iron, and second chances. Jordan sat on a rolling stool and let the noise of tools cover his breath. Marco said, "Tell me where to start." Jordan slid the family folder across a scarred bench. The papers fanned like fallen feathers. They traced shell companies and neat lies. Marco's eyes hardened into purpose. He said, "We build a map." Jordan nodded, grateful for the sentence, for the spine inside it. Outside, a train passed and the walls shook like a drum. Jordan felt the first stitch in an open wound. Detective Erin Blake waited at the back bay door with rain on her shoulders. And a measured stance. Jordan tasted metal in his mouth and wiped his palms. Erin said, "You are not the only person with a case." She listed statutes with the calm of a surgeon. Jordan said, "I did not do this." Erin's eyes did not accuse, but they did not forgive. She warned that vigilante steps would stack charges faster than a lawyer could exhale. Silence settled on the concrete like dust. Marco hovered, protective and unresolved. Erin said, "Bring me proof, not smoke." She handed over a card and held it a heartbeat longer than necessary. Jordan felt a choice harden into a road. Morning quiet felt like a lie as the narrator traced the path that brought Jordan Hale here. "I'm the Germans who won with also done this." He had rebuilt himself from a reckless youth into a man who filed every receipt, kept every promise, and slept without alarms in his head. Now the trust was ash, and the mirror returned a face learning to live with doubt. He jogged the river path, lungs burning, rhythm chasing order. Marco Reyes texted a map pin and a single word, "Come." Jordan paused by the rusted rail, watching gulls knife the water. He remembered his father's steady voice saying, "Keep your hands clean, even when the job is dirty." Jordan said, "I kept them clean." Wind cut through his jacket and carried the taste of rain. Somewhere, Vivian Cross arranged stories like knives. Somewhere, Cole Mercer counted options. Jordan slowed, then stopped, and chose to count truths. The shop's back office hummed with a tired fan as Marco Reyes spread photocopies like a dealer with bad news. Shell companies bloomed across the table with names that tried too hard to be honest. The narrator marked the through line, a signature that learned to imitate Jordan's impatience. Marco said, "This is handwriting dressed in makeup." Jordan steadied his breath and nodded. They circled a company tied to a townhouse that smelled of old wood and old money. Vivian Cross appeared in a society page clipping on the wall, smiling without warmth. Jordan said, "She wants obedience more than profit." Marco drew arrows, building a lattice of pressure points. The fan clicked, and the room felt smaller than the lie. Dinner tasted like theater. Vivian Cross welcomed Jordan into her penthouse with air that smelled of citrus and control. Cole Mercer stood by a window, a breath that could punch. Lila Hale hovered near the table, eyes skimming exits. The narrator caught the choreography. Charm, pressure, surrender. Vivian said, "Family survives by deciding who belongs." Jordan said, "Family survives by earning it." She poured wine and spoke about reputation as if it were a child. Cole set a hand on a chair and never blinked. Lila whispered, "Barely, please don't fight." Jordan logged every glance like evidence. The city flickered below, a field of currency and consequence. Detective Erin Blake met Jordan under the L, where conversations kept moving. The narrator noted how her posture wrote the rules before her mouth did. Erin said, "You're good at stepping near lines. Eventually you trip." Jordan said, "I'm walking to the truth." She offered a narrow bridge. Share what he had. Stop the solo excavations. Avoid the cuffs. Jordan pictured Marco's map and Lila's tremor. He said, "Truth dies in polite rooms." Trains screamed overhead and left rust in the air. Erin pocketed a spare doubt and said, "You think you're different. The ledger thinks otherwise." She handed a number for a safe drop and waited for him to choose. The wind smelled like metal, and choice tasted the same. The courthouse basement kept boxes like secrets. Marco Reyes slipped a folded bill to a clerk who pretended to be blind. The narrator watched Jordan hold the folder as if it might bite. Photocopier light blinked across the room like a small siren. Marco said, 2 minutes. Jordan checked the hallway and heard the air conditioner's tired breath. A file-stamped addendum slid into their lives. Jordan said, "This changes leverage." Footsteps thudded above, distant as a warning. The clerk coughed a caution and turned away. Pages fed through the machine, and time kept a stuttering rhythm. They left with copies that felt heavier than originals. Outside, daylight seemed to hesitate before letting them pass. Night folded around the Hale townhouse like a held breath. Jordan Hale counted windows, alarms, and habits he remembered from childhood visits. The narrator traced the lock's soft complaint as he eased it to silence. Inside, dust rose like memory. He turned off his flashlight and listened to the house speak in cold ticks. He found the study and the safe where reputation used to sleep. Jordan said, "You were always a museum to yourself." He coaxed the dial with patience, picturing Vivian Cross arranging her empire with gloved hands. The click landed like a verdict. The door inched open, and the room smelled of paper and polish. Jordan did not smile. He pocketed fear and reached for truth. The safe held a tidy storm. The narrator watched Jordan lift an envelope, embossed with Hale and a serif that believed itself immortal. Inside waited an addendum and a codicil that disagreed with history. Clauses curled like traps. A fountain pen lay beside a blotter, drawing a signature that tried to be his. Jordan said. You practiced me. He photographed each page, angles square, shadows disciplined. He found a note about milestones, rewritten days before the trust reversed. He felt heat in his chest and made it leave. He thought of Aaron Blake's bridge and Marco Reyes' arrows. He placed the papers back a hair off, enough to mark a timeline if anyone looked. He closed the safe and kept breathing. The SUV found Marco Reyes first. Cole Mercer leaned against the hood like a closing statement. Boomed. The narrator weighed the quiet between them and found a threat with good posture. Cole said, "You are handy with copies." Marco said, "I fix what breaks." Cole's smile was a room with no chairs. He stepped close and let silence do most of the work. The shop lights buzzed, and the parking lot held its breath. Cole said, "You tell Jordan I'm patient until I'm not." Marco held the stare and did not bluff. He said he already left town. Cole filed the lie and touched the hood twice, as if marking a target for later. The night turned heavier and did not move. The inbox detonated. Emails bloomed that painted Jordan Hale as the architect of his own ruin. The narrator noted their polish and timing, a cascade designed to look messy. Screenshots circulated with tidy metadata that lied with charm. Vivian Cross' name never appeared, and her influence appeared everywhere. Aaron Blake called, voice tight, and said, "This just got worse." Jordan said, "Then the mask fits." He traced headers and traced feelings and found the same hand. He sent Aaron a packet of clean photos from the safe. The phone throbbed with warnings, while the city moved on without him. He stood in the window and let the accusations burn without smoke. Lila Hale asked to meet in a chapel that smelled of candle wax and careful hope. The narrator followed Jordan's footsteps to a pew where she sat folded into herself. Lila said, "Please stop fighting them." Her voice carried a tremor that knew where fear lived. Jordan said, "What did they make you sign?" She looked at the stained glass saints and counted a breath, then another. She said, "Papers I did not read. Papers with my initials shaped by someone else." The words rattled the quiet. Jordan's anger cooled into aim. He said, "You won't be alone." Outside, traffic softened into a hush that sounded like a decision. She nodded and did not look back. The attic creaked like an old throat clearing itself as Jordan Hale uncoiled a brittle extension cord and fed life into a dusty projector. The narrator marked the first flicker. A summer yard, a paper crown, a father laughing from a bright distance that no longer answered. Jordan said, "Show me what you kept safe." The film jittered, then steadied on a picnic table where younger hands stacked envelopes labeled scholarship. A voice off camera said, "For kids who work harder than luck." The picture jumped to a paneled office, the father signing a trust document, pausing to look straight into the lens as if into tomorrow. Jordan pressed his palm to the wall and held still. Vivian Cross slipped into a frame years later, smiling beside the same desk, the same pen, a different ledger. The narrator felt the attic tighten around a truth that refused to stay buried. Jordan said, "You rewrote what was promised." Wind pressed rain against the eaves, and the film clicked on, unafraid. The cemetery carried the quiet like a duty as Jordan walked the gravel path and read names he did not know. The narrator watched him stop at a stone that kept his father's years without explaining them. He set the paper crown from the film against the base and brushed grit from the carved serif. Jordan said, "I could have used you now." Wind combed the grass and made the flag at the gate murmur. He unfolded a copy of the original trust language and traced the lines that spelled intention without loopholes. He said, "I will deliver this as you meant it." Far off, a bell rang once and then forgot to ring again. He stood there until the ache thinned into aim. Cars moved beyond the hedge, unconcerned, and a crow tested the sky with a single black curve. Jordan said, "I will end what she began." The words settled the way promises do when they finally learn their weight. Detective Aaron Blake stood by a diner window where neon wrote red on the glass and steam rehearsed escape from coffee cups. The narrator noted her file spread between salt and pepper and the way her finger tapped when something refused to fit. She said, "The emails land too clean." Jordan said, "Stage storms leave perfect puddles." She slid a printout with timestamps that circled back on themselves. She said, "If I can prove this, the ground changes." Jordan watched a waitress draw a smile on a receipt and felt a tug towards simpler problems. He said, "I have footage that shows intent." Aaron held his stare and measured risk. She said, "Then you give it to me, or you give me a reason to cuff you." A bus heaved past, shaking the window until the neon fractured across their faces. The narrator held the moment while both decided which law to serve first, the written one or the one that wakes you up at night. The auto shop wore its years with pride until the night chose to peel them back. The narrator heard the first hiss as a line was cut and smelled gasoline before the air understood. Marco Reyes locked the register, turned, and saw a flicker crawl under the bay door like a scouting tongue. He said, "No, not tonight," and sprinted as flame licked the spill. Jordan slapped the kill switch and threw a blanket that smothered a corner and angered the rest. Cole Mercer's silhouette paused in the streetlight, then vanished, leaving the echo of boots that knew schedules. Sirens argued their way closer while heat argued its absolute case. Marco said, "They want us scared." Jordan said, "Then we give them a reason to hurry." The fire died confused, the way bad plans sometimes do when courage arrives without permission. The shop coughed smoke and kept its roof. The plan needed bait sharp enough to cut pride, so Jordan drafted a rumor with teeth. The narrator traced the steps as he seeded a whisper about a ledger hidden in a storage unit by the river, complete with a locker number that meant nothing and everything. Marco said, "They will check fast." Jordan said, "We will check first." He placed a tracker the size of a stamp inside a discarded key fob and left it where Cole Mercer loved to find leverage. An hour later, the map on Jordan's phone blinked awake and began to move with purpose. He said, he bit. Aaron Blake's number burned his call log, and he let it ring once, then twice. Then he saved the call for the corner, where evidence turns into law. The river threw back the city in stripes, and the night began to gather witness. The storage unit door rolled up with a rattle that sounded like a verdict arriving by hand. The narrator watched Jordan step into the box of corrugated echoes and lay a decoy ledger on a crate painted with a shipping company logo that never shipped. He photographed the placement, the angle, the dust, every detail, a witness. Marco Reyes said, "You sure about broadcasting this?" Jordan said, "I'm sure about building a bridge I can burn after crossing." He angled a hidden camera toward the door and checked the live feed as the tracker drew nearer. He could feel the city leaning in. Air tasted of cardboard and cold metal. The feed blinked and caught a shadow stretching long. The unit held its breath as footsteps stopped outside and certainty lifted the latch. Cole Mercer entered like a man who owned night and rented consequence by the hour. The narrator measured his glance, quick and total, then watched him lift the ledger and weigh it like a tool he understood. He said, "Neat trick." Jordan, 2 units over, listened through thin metal and counted breaths. Marco mouthed numbers as the hidden feed streamed to a private list that could not look away. Cole flipped pages and found photos of pages that were somewhere else. He said, "Clever, but not enough." His phone buzzed with a message that told him to bring everything to Vivian Cross and to stop leaving footprints. He wiped the crate with a cloth and left the unit cleaner than he found it. Jordan whispered, "Got you," and tagged the timestamp with a small grin he did not let survive. The ledger that mattered waited where secrets prefer to breathe, behind a cracked panel in the old townhouse stairwell. The narrator followed Jordan's careful pry and the soft surrender of paint. He drew out a cloth-wrapped book that smelled of ink and older storms. Inside, columns marched like soldiers who knew their orders, names aligned to amounts that turned judges into errands and boards into puppets. A set of initials repeated with the steadiness of a metronome and the weight of a confession. Jordan said, "LH." Every quarter. He photographed, encrypted and copied, then slid a twin into the cavity with a whisper of dust. He said, "One to lose, one to live." Outside, a delivery truck backfired like a warning that arrived late. He closed the wall and left without touching the banister. Lila Hale trembled at the kitchen table as the narrator counted the seconds between her breaths. She unfolded the admission like a letter, addressed to a past self, and found the courage to read it aloud. She said, "They made me sign things I did not understand." Jordan placed a glass of water within reach and did not touch it again. He said, "We fix what they broke." She looked at the doorway as if it might become a mouth. She said, "Cole, watch the pen." Vivian smiled the whole time. The light through the blinds made prison stripes across the tile. Jordan slid a consent form toward her and explained every line until the tremor found a place to sit. She signed her name in letters that looked like themselves. The day felt new in a way that hurts before it helps. Vivian Cross preferred meetings that smelled like victory, so the riverfront restaurant obliged with linen and a view that forgave everything. The narrator caught the moment her eyes flicked to the phone, showing Cole Mercer in transit, and judged the distance. Jordan walked in with a calm that had learned to wear armor without rattling. Vivian said, "End this by handing me what you should never have taken." Jordan said, "End this by giving back what was never yours." She laughed in a register that bought loyalty. He slid a sealed envelope across the table and watched her measure it like a bomb. He said, "That copy dies the moment harm touches Marco Reyes or Lila Hale." Thunder rolled off the lake, and waiters pretended to be weatherproof. Vivian's smile shifted half a degree, the way cliffs shift just before they let go. The countdown began in Jordan Hale's chest, as the narrator weighed two clocks that refused to agree. Marco Reyes was missing, and the ledger could bury Vivian Cross if it survived the night. Jordan said, "Choose fast and make it count." He stared at the duplicate files lined like lifeboats and heard traffic grind along the river. Aaron Blake texted a neutral question that hid a warning. Jordan typed, then deleted the safest answer he would never send. He mapped the meat, the exits, the camera angles, and the places where fear tends to win. He said, "I will not trade a life for silence." The room smelled of coffee and rain, and the door felt heavier than doors should. Somewhere, Cole Mercer tuned his patience to a blade. Somewhere, Lila Hale waited for news that would decide how she slept for years. The narrator held the air until it thinned and then let the plan breathe. Jordan staged the safeguards like a locksmith who owed the city a favor. The narrator watched him seed cloud backups with time bombs that would bloom on a dead man's switch. He taped a tracker beneath Cole Mercer's SUV bumper and photographed the placement for court daylight. Jordan said, "Every door I open will close behind me." He labeled a decoy drive for Vivian and hid the real teeth in 3 places that hated fire. He rehearsed a short speech he hoped he would not need. The river wind lifted his collar and rubbed the truth into his skin. Aaron Blake waited 2 blocks away because belief needs distance when the law is not invited. Jordan said, "We move. We record. We survive." The night nodded once and held its breath. The derelict freight yard opened like a mouth that forgot how to smile. Floodlights carved long knives across stacked containers, while a train idled like a threat with wheels. Cole Mercer stood with Marco Reyes bound to a chair that did not deserve it. The narrator counted 4 shooters in cover, and 1 lie for every square yard. Jordan said, "You walk him to me, I walk the ledger to you." Vivian Cross spoke from a catwalk where authority likes its height. She said, "Deliver tribute, accept mercy." Jordan lifted the decoy and let cameras see it clear. He said, "Mercy stops when harm starts." Marco blinked twice, a code the shop taught them when sirens were not friends. The wind tasted of iron and endings. The yard waited for someone to choose the first bruise. The trap snapped with a siren that felt rehearsed, and late on purpose. The narrator caught the angles as squad cars boxed the yard in red and blue, and Aaron Blake realized the anonymous tip wore Vivian Cross's perfume. "Aaron," said "stand down," means stand alive into a radio that argued. Vivian lifted her hand like a conductor and let panic hunt bargains. Cole Mercer moved to cut the distance and found Jordan cutting it first. Jordan said, "We do this on the record," and lifted a phone already live to a curated audience. Bullets did not fly because futures were watching. A floodlight popped and took one shadow with it. The balance shifted a half-inch, and that was enough for truth to find footing. Jordan widened the channel and let the city eavesdrop. The narrator felt phones wake in pockets in newsrooms as a private war became a public oath. Jordan said, "Harm him, and the files go everywhere that matters." He triggered a countdown that marched across the screen like a patient drum. Vivian Cross smiled the way glass smiles before it breaks. She said, "You would drown your own name to spite mine." Jordan said, "I would wash it clean." Aaron Blake stepped into the light and announced that any shot fired would write a confession on every camera here. Cole Mercer weighed the room and holstered a choice that might have saved him. Marco Reyes exhaled. The countdown reached 0 and waited for the next lie to move it again. The yard stood very still. The standoff cracked when a decision finally recognized itself. Cole Mercer dragged Marco Reyes forward, then saw the lens find his face and blinked like a man who met his future early. The narrator watched Aaron Blake close the angle with a voice that made room for surrender. She said, "Enough." Jordan said, "Marker down, Cole." Silence stacked, then tilted. Cole lifted his hands and chose air over legend. Officers moved with economy and wrote his wrists into steel. Vivian Cross hissed from above that loyalty died cheap tonight. Jordan said, "It lived long enough to tell the truth." The yard exhaled and forgot to breathe again. Vivian Cross ran the numbers in her eyes and found none that loved her back. The narrator followed her through a service stair that smelled of rust and power. Jordan took the stairs 2 at a time and reached the landing where the ledger's math became flesh. Vivian said, "Power forgives everything." Jordan said, "Not when it stops being yours." Aaron Blake appeared in the doorway with a warrant that grew teeth in the light of the stream. She read charges like nails tapping a lid. Vivian looked past them toward a city that once applauded and now recorded. She lowered her chin as if to drink the last seconds slowly. The hallway remembered every footstep it had ever kept. They gave each other the courtesy of truth in a corridor that had seen only orders. The narrator watched Vivian cross-measure Jordan Hale, as if pricing a statue she once owned. She said, "Family is a contract you failed to sign." Jordan said, "Family is a promise you failed to keep." Her mouth tightened and searched for the angle that used to open every door. Aaron Blake waited, letting the floor belong to history for another breath. Vivian said, "You will miss me when you count what remains." Jordan said, "I will count what was meant and see it delivered." The words did not echo. They just stayed. By morning, indictments unfolded like weather maps across screens that used to sell shoes. The narrator traced the signatures that finally belonged to themselves. Marco Reyes sat on a hospital gurney with a split lip and a grin that refused stitches. Lila Hale dictated a statement that sounded like a hinge turning right. Jordan delivered evidence with hands that shook only after they opened. Aaron Blake signed a report that did not absolve him, but did not cage him either. She said, "Next time, call sooner." Jordan said, "Next time, there is no next time." The city pretended not to stare and failed. Dawn pressed a pale line across the lake as Jordan Hale stood at the railing with the old house key in his palm. The narrator felt the weight shrink to the size of a choice. News choppers thumped distant like hearts that forgot their owners. Jordan said, "No more doors for ghosts." He flicked the key and watched it arc, catch light, and vanish. His phone buzzed with a future he had not met yet. He let it buzz and listened to water edit the night into something readable. The wind smelled clean. He turned and walked toward a city that now knew his name for the right reason, and for the last time today he did not look back.